Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting history. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Alright, morning, it's Wednesday. And we are going to be listening to Joe ramble about the Super Bowl. Because the Super Bowl is coming up this weekend. I don't mind football. However, I do not like Super Bowl halftimes. Never have. Probably never will, but we'll see. My favorite part of the Super Bowl are the commercials. I'm working on our shout out for 1700. Hopefully that will be up Friday. We'll see. And then, of course, a video with a special guest next week. Actually, a couple of them, so we'll see. I think there's 3-ish. I think 3. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, today I've chosen a cat race because yesterday we went to try to see Argyle, and there's a cat in it, which David is obsessed with. He wants to see if the cat survives. And unfortunately, we were not able to see it yesterday because there was a group of 50 high school boys. I don't know where they came from or why they were there, all seeing Argyle. And so we had a change of plans. Yeah, Angel wasn't doing that. So anyway, ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. I forgot to set it because I'm... Okay, here we go. There's She Stole. There's Amanda. There's Southern, there's Eddie, there's Gen X, there's Team Para, there's Swoop, there's Tramps, there's Southern, there's Jackie, there's Aisha, there's VS, there's Spectral, there's John P, there's Rich Cat, Carter, Cruising is Fun, Turtle, Jared, Goat, Derek, Bluegrass, Hiking Ontario's currently in the lead. Carnivore. Let's see. Neil. TNT. Richard. Let's see. Linda. Kaz. Fine. Jamaica. Lynn. Brad. Anthony. Lynn. Looks like it's going to be Felipa. Apologize if I am saying that badly, because I probably am. I am terrible with names. Hang on a minute. Alright, so here it is. She's a Filipino woman from the Philippines. Speaks Tagalog and English. Blogs about daily life experiences. She does a lot of live streaming with connecting disabilities. So check her out. Like, share, comment. Enjoy the video. Alright, bearded historian, tell us something interesting.
Well, coming up Sunday, we have
nobody knows.
Nobody, I mean, you know, maybe people are living under a rock or out of the United States. Some people even out of the United States follow this, which is kind of insane, because it's American football, and they're going to have the Super Bowl. You've got the Kansas City Chiefs, who I have a strong disliking. What? And the San Francisco 49ers, who aren't even in San Francisco anymore. They play in Santa Clara.
They're lies.
Will face off, and this is the hard part. They're playing in Las Vegas, where the Raiders at their home field in Allegiant Stadium. So if that doesn't make, you know, Al Davis turn over in his grave, I don't know what does. But now the history, though, this is where we get to have some fun, because we're gonna crack open the vaults to go look in the big gray books and stuff like that. And the precursors to the Super Bowl, all the way back in the day when you had college football starting their season-ending events, they would have bowl games. And the big ones was like the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, was first played in 1902 as part of the Tournament East-West football game in the Tournament of Roses. In 1923, the East-West football game moved to the new Rose Bowl Stadium. Stadium got its name from the fact that the game was played there as part of the Tournament of Roses, and it was shaped like a bowl, much like the Yale Bowl in New Haven, Connecticut. And the Tournament of Roses football game thusly became known as the Rose Bowl game. Well, the popularity for postseason college football, they had for Miami the Orange Bowl, in New Orleans the Sugar Bowl, El Paso the Sun Bowl, and in 1935 for Dallas the Cotton Bowl in 1937. By the time the first Super Bowl was played, the term bowl for any major American football game was already well established. Well, for decades, the first 4 decades after the NFL came into effect in 1920, the NFL actually had to fight off several rival leagues. Now, if we go back into history, the original, titles that were fought. Okay, in 1920, the world champions was a team called the Akron Pros. There's a history tidbit for you. They went 8-0-3 from the APFA, the precursor to the NFL, followed up by the Chicago Staleys, who went 9-1-1. And then the NFL was adopted as the namesake. And interestingly enough, 3 of those years were won by both Canton Bulldogs and the Cleveland Bulldogs. And, somebody by the name of, Jim Thorpe.
No.
But then the Chicago Cardinals won their first title. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. Quite a creative name there. The New York Giants, the Providence Steamrollers, Green Bay Packers, who would win 3 straight, starting in 1929 to 1931. Chicago would win 2 more. The Giants would pick up a win. But the big thing here is that a lot of these were just the top 2 teams at the end. They'd be like within 1 game of each other, but it would be really frustrating if you happened to be the 3rd team. Because, you basically had a chance to get there, you just fell short. And about all you could say for them was, well, let's try it next year. Now, one thing that they did do, though, they used to have a contest between that 3rd and that 4th bracket. And those guys would play each other in what was called the Losers Bowl. Which, in its own way, when those guys had a chance to play the top teams, at least that way they could, say, well, our season wasn't completely done. But anyway, as things, started advancing and going up further, about 1960, things really kind of got turned on their ear because another league started up, and it was really hard to fend this team off. This is the AFL, the American Football League, and it basically was formed because of one of the owners had a chance. He wanted to buy into, if I remember right, I think it was the Cardinals, but the NFL wouldn't allow him to buy it. They're like, no. We already have an idea set up. And so this guy, Mr. Hunt, took and got together with a group that was known as the Foolish Club.
Woo! That's a good name.
Yeah. And they sat down and they were like, I bet we can make a league out of this. And so they got together with, several of these other key players, Baron Hilton, Ralph Wilson, and several other owners, all sat down and started contemplating how we could build a league that could rival the NFL. And, of course, when you're trying to do something like this, word will get out. Well, the NFL saw this and went, no, we don't want any competition. We had to squash competition back in 1948 from the AAFC. That's where the Cleveland Browns came into existence from. But finally, 1949 came along. The AAFC basically gave up a couple of their teams, and that's where if I remember, I think it was the Indianapolis Colts also joined, or Baltimore Colts at that time, moved over and joined the NFL, and the rest of the league just kind of fell apart. But what wound up happening is that the NFL said, AFL guys, we might have a deal for you. If you can wait a year, we'll pull you into the NFL, but you got to give up on the AFL. Well, interestingly enough, only one team bought that lure. They had later become the Minnesota Vikings. Now, there's a bit of irony in its own right. Because the Minnesota Vikings moved over, a team was built, interestingly enough, the Oakland Raiders.
Whee!
Of course, the Raiders were its own little story. You can check it back in the history archives for the Bud Files. I spoke about it at length. But anyway, what wound up happening was that originally Lamar Hunt had the idea, and he says, what if we took the best team in the AFL and had them play the best team in the NFL? And, the NFL was like, I don't know about that. That could be really strange. Our guys really wouldn't want to play against your guys. There was a lot of people that were, hesitant about the idea. The thing that would have been interesting was that first year that they were in existence, 1960, you would have seen the Philadelphia Eagles, which went 10-2, a really strong Eagles team, would have faced off against the Houston Oilers. And at that time, the Houston Oilers were led by a journeyman quarterback named George Blanda. Little history piece there. And actually, interestingly enough, the Houston Oilers went back-to-back in their first 2 years in the AFL. The Green Bay Packers showed up in 1961. They won 11-3. They won the NFL title. In fact, the Packers won the first two, the second and the third season there. Their second year, they went 13-1. Dallas Texans went 11-3. Bears would come in 63, go 11-1-2, and they would have faced off against the San Diego Chargers, which went 11-3. After that, you had 2 years. The Buffalo Bills were really sharp. They would have faced off against the Cleveland Browns and the Green Bay Packers in 65. Well, finally, as the history tidbits would go, 1966, somebody finally sat down and they said, let's try this idea out. And so, about the mid-1960s, Lamar Hunt, again, the guy who basically spearheaded the whole AFL, was the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs. He used the term Super Bowl to refer to this AFL-NFL championship game in the merger meetings. Hunt later said it was namely because one of his kids was playing with what was called a Super Ball toy. And ironically, a vintage example of this ball is on display at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Well, in a July 25th, 1966 letter to NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle, Hunt wrote, "I have kiddingly called it the Super Bowl, which is obviously can be improved upon." Well, the league owners came up with the idea of the AFL-NFL championship game, which sounds kind of anticlimactic. But in July of 1966, the Kansas City Star quoted Hunt in discussing the Super Bowl. "That's my term for a championship game between the two leagues," and the media immediately started using that term. Now, although the league stated that in 1967 that not many people like it, asking for suggestions and considering alternatives such as the Merger Bowl and the game, the Associated Press reported that the Super Bowl grew and grew and grew until it reached the point that there were Super Week, Super Sunday, Super Teams, Super Players, ad infinitum. Super Bowl became official, beginning with the third annual game. Interestingly enough, Roman numerals would be used to identify each Super Bowl rather than the year that it was held, since the fifth edition starting in January of 1971. The sole exception for this naming convention tradition occurred with Super Bowl 50. Anybody want to know why?
Triple X. No? Damn it.
50?
I can't remember what the numbers are.
Is an L.
Losers.
Losers.
They're
right?
all losers.
Super Bowl 50. You're a losing team. No. But anyway, that was played in 2016, following the 2015 regular season. The following year, the nomenclature returned to the Roman numeral, with Super Bowl L1 following... One loser. Following the 2016 season.
With two losers.
Two losers. Now, after the NFL's Green Bay Packers won the first two Super Bowls, some team owners feared for the future of the merger. And at that time, many doubted the competitiveness of the AFL teams compared with the NFL counterparts, although that perception changed when the AFL's New York Jets defeated the heavily favored Baltimore Colts in Super Bowl III in Miami. A year later, Kansas City Chiefs would beat the Minnesota Vikings 23-7 in Super Bowl IV in New Orleans, which was the final AFL-NFL World Championship game played before the merger. Beginning in 1970, the NFL realigned with two conferences. Former AFL teams plus three NFL teams would constitute the American Football Conference, while the remaining NFL clubs would form the National Football Conference, the NFC. The champions of the two conferences would play each other in the Super Bowl. Now, winning teams would receive the Vince Lombardi Trophy, named after the former coach of the Green Bay Packers, who won the first two Super Bowl games, as well as 5 NFL championships preceding the merger, in 61, 62, 65, 66, and 67. That's a lot of titles.
That is a lot of titles.
Now, following his death in 1970, the trophy was named after him, and the first trophy awarded under the new name was presented to the Baltimore Colts following their win in Super Bowl V in Miami. Now, every year the Super Bowl is held in January until 2002, when the week of games following the September 11th attacks were postponed and rescheduled, extending the season by a week and causing Super Bowl 36 to be played in February the 3rd. Beginning in the Super Bowl 38 in 2004, the Super Bowl was scheduled for the first Sunday in February until the scheduled expansion in the 2021 season moved the game to the second Sunday. Now, the current NFL schedule begins the weekend immediately after Labor Day, first Monday in September. The weekend is the first of an 18-week regular season, followed by 3 weeks of playoff games, 1 week for the Pro Bowl. The Super Bowl is contested the week after the Pro Bowl. Now, there have been some debates.
What?
Some people want the Pro Bowl to go back to what it originally was. They played it in Hawaii. It was a lot of fun. The players would, goof around a lot. Players were proud to actually represent their teams. They would have blue jerseys for the NFC teams, white jerseys for the AFC teams, and they'd still have their obviously the helmets. But now it's almost like flag football. Some of the fans really hate it. Some almost think they'd just get rid of it altogether. But now, as far as the Super Bowl goes, right now, the Steelers and the New England Patriots are tied with a record 6 Super Bowl wins. Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers have 5 victories. As I said, the 49ers are actually going to be playing for their 6th. And then the Giants have 4. 14 other NFL franchises have won at least 1 Super Bowl. Now, the Patriots own the record for the most Super Bowl appearances, with 11. The Cowboys, Steelers, Broncos, and the San Francisco 49ers are tied for second with 8 appearances apiece, reaching that milestone in this respective order. Belichick owns the record for the most Super Bowl wins, 8, and appearances, 12. 9 times as head coach, once as assistant head coach, and twice as defensive coordinator by an individual. Tom Brady has the most Super Bowl starts, 10, and wins as a player, 7, while Charles Haley has the second most wins among players with 5. Now, for those of us who want to read something depressing, 8 teams have appeared in Super Bowl games without a win. The Minnesota Vikings were the first team to appear 4 times without a win, while the Buffalo Bills played in a record 4 straight, losing each game. The Patriots and Broncos are tied with the most Super Bowl losses at 5. Cleveland Browns, Detroit Lions, Houston Texans, and Jacksonville Jaguars are the 4 teams who have never appeared in a Super Bowl, although both the Browns and Lions both have won NFL championships before the Super Bowl era. In fact, at one time, the Browns were quite a powerhouse team back in the day. Now, the Jaguars, who began play in 1995, and the Texans, who began play in 2002, are the 2 youngest franchises in the league. Now, the early dominance, as they were talking about, was the Packers. One other issue that also became kind of interesting is when they started coming up with what was known as the wild cards. Now, again, back in the early days, you'd have the top 2 teams face each other, and then the top team was the winner. Well, with the advent of the Super Bowl, again, it was the 2 top teams, except this time instead of both the teams coming from one division or one conference, they had one team from each conference appear. And so, AFC versus the NFC. Again, the Packers had their dominance going strong in the 60s. In Super Bowl III, the AFL New York Jets broke that tradition when they beat the Baltimore Colts, who were a 19.5-point favorite, 16-7, led by Joe Namath, who famously guaranteed a Jets win before the game, and former Colts head coach Wayback, and their victory proved the AFL was the NFL's competitive equal. Now, the 70s became kind of interesting after the merger. The 3 franchises, the Cowboys, Miami Dolphins, and the Steelers, would go on to dominate the 70s, winning a combined 8 Super Bowls between them in the decade. Hint, the Raiders were one of those teams.
What? No.
Now, Baltimore Colts, now a member of the AFC, would start the decade by defeating the Cowboys in Super Bowl V, a game which is notable as being the only Super Bowl to date in which a player from the losing team would become the Super Bowl MVP, a guy named Chuck Howley. Beginning with the Super Bowl, all Super Bowls have served as the NFL's championship game. Now, Cowboys, coming back from a loss the previous season in Super Bowl VI, would beat the Dolphins. However, the Dolphins would be the final loss in over a year, as the next year the Dolphins would go on a 14-0 regular season run, eventually winning the Super Bowl in Super Bowl VII. The only team to finish an entire perfect regular and postseason. The only other team to come close, New England Patriots, who lost their Super Bowl. The Dolphins would also repeat as the league championships by winning Super Bowl VIII a year later. In the mid-70s, the Steelers became the first NFL dynasty in the post-merger era by winning 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. They were led by head coach Chuck Noll and the play of guys like Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Lynn Swann, John Stallworth, Mike Webster, and their dominant steel curtain defense. Now, many of the team's players were selected in the 1974 draft, where they were able to select 4 future Hall of Famers. A 5th player, Donnie Shell, was signed by Pittsburgh after going unselected in the draft. He too was later enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Now, the Steelers were the first team to win 3 and then 4 Super Bowls and appeared in 6 AFC Championship games during that decade, making the playoffs in 8 straight seasons. Pittsburgh still remains the only team to win back-to-back Super Bowls twice and 4 Super Bowls in a 6-year period. Now, the Steelers dynasty, as mentioned, was broken up by the Raiders in their first win. The thing that made it interesting is the Raiders' win came against the Vikings, the team that basically got rid of the AFL to get into the NFL. There's irony for you, kids.
Whoops.
Now, what's interesting about this also is that the Vikings were not a bad team. Up to that point, they'd actually gone to the Super Bowl 3 times, and each time they would run into a nemesis, whether it was the Kansas City Chiefs, which knocked them out in the 4th Super Bowl. But interestingly enough, that loss was the last time the Vikings went to a Super Bowl, all the way back to 1977. It was for the 76th season, but, playing in January the next year. Yeah. But, yeah, that was their Purple People Eater defense. And after losing in Super Bowl 4, 8, 9, and 11, yeah. Now, the NFC, interestingly enough, went on a pretty good run during the 80s and 90s. The Raiders would pick up 2 more wins in 1980, where they were a wild card, interestingly enough. The 49ers went on their tear. They also had the Giants get in there and win a couple. The Redskins pulled off a pretty good trick because they actually managed to win 3 titles with 3 different quarterbacks.
Whoops.
Yeah, never heard of it, ever. And of course, the 49ers had guys like Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Roger Craig, Ronnie Lott. Eventually, Montana would get retired. Well, he wouldn't retire. He got injured. It brought Steve Young to the forefront. Montana left to go to play for Kansas City, and the 49ers still won another title. So, interestingly enough, the 49ers won 4 Super Bowls in the decade, made 9 playoff appearances between 1981 and 1990, including 8 division championships, becoming the second dynasty. They would achieve the record in 1984 of going 18-1, doing so under Walsh. In 1989, the 49ers, under first-year head coach George Seifert, put up the most lopsided victory in Super Bowl history, 55-10.
Ooh.
Punishment. And of course, in the 1980s, they also had, which, in my opinion, probably one of the strongest defensive games, was the 1985 Chicago Bears. This is the most unique team in the fact that they had a defensive guy that was almost like the quarterback. And they punished teams that they played. It wasn't pretty in any way, shape, or form. Again, the Giants also got in there, won a couple. They got Super Bowl 21 and 25. Interestingly enough, if I remember, I think 25 was the one that called in to play the wide right Steve Norwood kick. But yeah, the Redskins would win with Joe Theismann, Doug Williams, Mark Rippon. The Giants would win with Phil Simms and Jeff Hostetler. And again, the Raiders would win their 2 titles, interestingly enough, were the only AFC team to interrupt the Super Bowl dominance of the NFC teams. They won the 15 and the 18. And interestingly enough, they won them in 2 different towns, Oakland, L.A. Conversely, the Bengals would get in there twice, but weren't able to capture titles. The Dolphins fell to the 49ers. And the Broncos would go 3 times and lose all 3. And so the Broncos were one of the first teams to lose 4 straight titles. Now, the Cowboys were interesting when it came into the 90s because they made a brilliant trade. If you've ever seen some of these trades go off and you go, what were they thinking? They made a trade with the Vikings. And it was such a lopsided deal. To this day, people still go, was that part of the Herschel Walker deal?
Did they mean to do that?
It because literally it was like, we're going to trade all these picks, and they wound up just, wasn't pretty. Cowboys would win 3 of 4 Super Bowls, and they won Super Bowl 27, 28, and 30, led by Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin. And all 3 of those guys are now together in the Hall of Fame. The Cowboys' streak was interrupted by the 49ers, who were the first team in the league to win their 5th title overall with Super Bowl 29, featuring Super Bowl MVP and Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young, who threw a Super Bowl record 6 touchdown passes. Hall of Fame wide receiver Jerry Rice, all-world wide receiver, And they also had a Hall of Fame cornerback, Deion Sanders. And of course, the Cowboys' victory in Super Bowl 30 in the next year also gave them 5 titles overall, and they did so with Sanders after he won the Super Bowl the previous year with the 49ers. Hey, I won with these guys. I can win with these guys too.
Woo! I think that's a sign that somebody actually kind of has skill.
Yeah.
It's because
I can switch
really
teams and it don't matter.
who's behind them.
Of course,
but at the other time, sometimes it does depend on who's behind them.
Yeah. The one thing also that's kind of funny with Deion Sanders is that they said with him, it's one of these guys that basically, that's his island. You can throw over there. You're not throwing on this side, no matter what happens. He's that good of a player. Some teams have defensive players like that. Back in the days when the Raiders had guys like Michael Haynes and Lester Hayes, those two guys would shut down an entire secondary. Deion Sanders, basically, you had no choice. You don't throw to Deion's side. Damaga Asomagwo was another player like that. But since we've rambled on for a little bit here, but you folks on Sunday, you go ahead and enjoy the game. Have some popcorn, have some pizza.
And what part of the game were we watching?
I'm not watching any of it. We're watching the commercials.
Exactly. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
What part of the game were we watching? The
Commercials.
That's it.
Yeah. But this has been the Bearded Historian. You folks have a good weekend. We'll catch you next week.
Bye-bye, peoples.